Hello YouTube! Since I already introduced my little house, I thought the first thing I would start with is the kitchen. The reason is it's the heart of the home. It's where you come to get your sustenance, your food is stored here, you get drink, and all of that, and it's where you prepare it. So I figured it would make very good sense to start here. And this kitchen, as I will show you, is my kitchen. And it's what I've done to it when I first moved in the house, and I haven't done a whole lot to the space since. It's not a hip kitchen, it's not a new kitchen by any means, but it's mine, it functions, and I like it. I like it for what it is. Now, I know there are many of you out there who will look at this and go, "Ooh, this is an old rundown kitchen, ick!" Well, I would say get over it right now, because this is my kitchen. I roll the way I roll, and as a result, I do what I do, and I am not afraid to show my kitchen in its less than pristine state. And this is not its pristine state. 1908 was when the house was built, but the kitchen, as you'll see, was supposedly done in the 1920s. 1924 was the year that I was given. So we'll see. We'll see what that entails. But it hasn't been updated since. Always been painted. It's had new flooring put down over the years. It's had appliances replaced over time. But the basic kitchen has not been updated since then. So, without further ado, let's get on with it. This window used to be bigger until they replaced the windows back in 2007, so it's a little narrower than it would be. But it's a window. The room itself is one fairly large room. I'm going to say it's 15 and a half by 11, something like that. Big. It's an eat-in kitchen, and that back in there is the laundry room, which I'll show in another video. As you can tell, it's not a fancy kitchen by any means, but I will show you what I've done to make this kitchen work the way it work as well as it does. And basically, it's what I like to cook. So I cook for me, and I set my kitchen up just that way. Now, when you're buying an older home, the older the home, the more history it has before your ownership. Which means you're also dealing with maintenance or non-maintenance or deferred maintenance on the home prior to your ownership, your stewardship, so to speak. Because now that you've bought a home, it's your responsibility to take care of the house. Make repairs on it, or get someone to come take care of those repairs for you. All those things are maybe due, will be due, and at some point will come due. It all depends on the weather and what damage it might be causing, simple age, and how long the maintenance has been deferred. Again, most homes beyond a certain age are rife with problems, one way or the other. Some houses are going to be more solid, that don't require as much structural work to get going again, but they're in good enough shape that you can pretty much move in as is. Just update them when you have time and money. And for that reason alone, you got to choose your house wisely and choose within your budget. As a result of that, someone who's on a limited budget, i.e. money does not grow on trees, and you want to live in a decent neighborhood but that is not ghetto, something's going to have to give. And that give is going to be the age of the house and its condition. That's what I'm talking about here. I bought this house for what is considered dirt cheap for 2016. See, I've been in this house now almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years this coming July. And it's been a relatively good 5 years. This year, notwithstanding, there's been a pandemic, then there's the whole debacle with the President Trump and all the things he tried to do to squash the elections so he could win it illegitimately. But the country prevailed. He's lost, and there's no getting around it. Meanwhile, the pandemic turned into a depression, recession, whatever you want to call it, and economic stimulus has been what's keeping me afloat right now. I'm not even working, which is part of why I'm getting this channel up and running. Two, because of that, I haven't been able to do the kind of things this kitchen really needs. The kitchen, as I said, was built in 1924. The house was built in 1908. There was an addition put onto the front of the house. That addition was built in the mid-80s. It added 2 bedrooms and a hall. That's it. The house was originally a 1-bedroom with kitchen and single bath. The bath, I think, may have been added at the time the kitchen was done. Typically, when you get prior to a certain point, it's not uncommon to find the plumbing of the house grouped together, i.e. the bathroom, single, and the kitchen adjacent to each other. It didn't have laundry porches back in those days. You did, but if anything, it was makeshift. Washing machines barely existed at that point. In the 20s and 30s, washing machines were just starting to come on the market in the teens and 20s, and by the 30s it was starting to become well known, but dishwashers didn't exist at this point. They existed, but they were for the well-to-do, they were expensive, and they didn't start becoming common until the late 50s, early 60s. But washing machines, yes, many homes didn't even have electricity up until the early teens, early 1900s to 1910s. So as a result, a lot of these homes were updated over time with kitchens and bathrooms that either didn't exist or barely existed in the time and haven't been updated much since. Some homes still have 60 amp fuse breakers throughout. And some of them were updated and had either 60 or 100 amp circuit breakers put in. If they still didn't have their original fuse panels. I lived in an apartment that was built in the 1920s and still had fuses. They were updated with the Edison fuse inserts that prevented you from using a larger size fuse for the circuit. But otherwise, it was still the original fuse panel or fuse box mounted above the stove in the kitchen. The kitchen had its original cabinets, but counters had been replaced, flooring had been replaced, and a few things like that, but it was still original and more or less than not. Another apartment that I moved into, they replaced the fuse boxes, but they didn't replace the wiring, which may have been still knob and tube. And that was a similar vintage building. This house had its fuse panel replaced in probably the 70s or very early 80s when the Federal Pacific Electric still was making circuit breaker panel boxes. They were since been proven to be defective. They were put into many homes knowing they were defective because they didn't always not trip when they're supposed to, and kept the power going into the house, and that's what caused fires during the negotiation process for buying the house. also had a new roof put on the house, and it had a sewer line put in because the old concrete or cement pipes were starting to separate at the joints and leaking, and as a result, sludge was starting to build up in the pipes. They hadn't gone bad yet because they didn't know about it, but it was all done on the seller's dime. Anyway, back to this kitchen. It was supposedly remodeled in the 1920s. In those days, you had cabinets. You see, older houses did not have, if they predated the 1940s or 50s, chances are there was no standardization into layout, counter height, any of that. So when you bought a home with, oh, this wall is going to be great for a cabinet, so we'll put a cabinet here, and maybe this cabinet over in this corner might be the sink, and the two aren't even close. With the stove, if it's electric, they'll have an electric outlet mounted, or they'll have a gas line on another wall, off by itself, where you can just bring your stove in, set it up, connect the flue, boom, done. In the 30s, they decided to study what it would take to make a kitchen more effective and efficient kitchen for the average home cook. That's when standardization came into being. So something like your prep space, they found that no less than 35 inches wide was adequate. It's the minimum requirement for prep space because you need to be able to account for room of your elbows, items that you use, etc. And that's the minimum. The more the barrier, up to a point. But the minimum is, that's what it took to feel comfortable. Another standardization is the standardization of counter height, the standardization of appliances, the counter depth, as well as upper cupboards, and as well as space between the lower cabinets and the upper cabinets. This has the tendency to make the kitchen work better for the average home cook. So without further ado, I'm going to show you what I have done, what this kitchen looked like before I did what I did, and then what I've done to it since to make it work for me. Because the way we set up our kitchens is actually very personal. Because the way I do things is going to be a little bit different from somebody else who's doing the same task. Because of how we're wired, how we move in the space, and how we react to the space. And as well as how we cook, i.e. what we cook. Because if you're doing a lot of deep frying, that's going to require a different set of tools and probably some slightly different modified steps to stir fry or to fry and stuff of that nature. If you do a lot of fancy cooking, that's great. If you do a lot of baking, that's going to require some parameters to make that work. So without further ado, let's show the kitchen in its glory. Okay, let's start here at the stove. When I moved in the house, this is pretty much where the stove was. It might have shifted an inch or two on either side, but that's where it is. That's where the connection is. So I didn't move that. What I had here, which is the refrigerator, was a wine cabinet or a storage rack thingy that wasn't wide enough, was too low, and really didn't make a good counter. It went bye-bye. I sold it on Craigslist. The refrigerator that came with the house was an almond-colored Whirlpool that was from the mid-90s, and that sat literally right next to the stove. And there was a plug down there on the floor for it. I just unplugged it and moved it to its present location, which I've since replaced with this black GE. And that was the kitchen layout for about a month. And then I bought this island. Went up to IKEA, and after looking around, I settled on this almost $400 island. It technically is an island, but it can also be used as a counter because it was the only model that was counter height and counter depth, but 47 inches in length. The wall itself is 49, so it was perfect. It came with 2 drawers, as you can see, and 2 commodious shelves. Then the following year, I added the pot rack and the shelf below it. And along the way, I added a power strip because there was no outlets on the floor, no outlets on that wall except for what was on the floor for things like the light, and the food processor. So the shelf is a stainless steel wrapped Mossby shelf with Ekby brackets from IKEA. The rack is a Grundle shelf that can be used as a shelf or as a pot rack, and I bought hooks for it at IKEA, and it became my pot rack. This is for all the pots that I use on a daily basis or near daily basis. Bins are for all the small stuff that I use all the time, like the blades for the food processor, the spice and coffee grinders, etc. I know for a fact that there is controversy over open shelving in a kitchen. Too many uninitiated will say, but the dust and the grease, everything's going to get dirty. If you use it every day, chances are you won't have that problem. You might have to every 6 months pull things off the shelf and wipe the shelves itself down. But if you're cooking your meals every day and you're using all the dishes that are on that shelf, they will get washed quicker than they will ever get dirty. It's when you don't use the 2 wine glasses in the back of the cupboard for 6 months. Yes, you gotta wash them before you use them. It's just common sense, and it should be a no-brainer. I'm one of those people that I like my things to be out in the open where I use the most often. I brought these down out of their usual places so you can see them a little easier. The yellow crock is actually a flower pot from IKEA called the cylinder. And when I bought it in the late 90s, they came in various colors, along with this yellow, a red, a blue, green, and I think black and white were the colors. I think they only have the black and the white now, if they still even carry it. But they did carry it for quite a while, in just black or white. The red crock is from Le Creuset. Founded at TJ Maxx probably about 15 years ago. Maybe a little bit longer than that. Actually, I think it was quite a bit longer than that. I was getting tired of digging around for the smaller stuff in the big crock, and that was the next best thing. And then after a while, I was digging around in that for items to use. And that ultimately begat the other 2. And it didn't all happen at once. The yellow and the red crocks were from the late 90s, if I remember correctly. I know the flower pot was from the late 90s, but I think I got the red crock somewhere between 98 and 2000, if I recall. Then the brown pot, which was something I found and picked up at an estate of some dear family friends. And along the way, I picked up trays. The red one and the sort of turquoise one in the back are made by a company called Poppin. It's actually part of a desk set. And the blue one I bought I think 8 years ago at Utrecht's, an art supply store in Seattle. The red tray I picked up a few months ago at TJ Maxx for about $4. This little gray tray was bought a couple months ago, 2 or 3 months ago, at Fred Meyer. And I figured it would be perfect for my salt cellar, which is actually a vintage Franciscan ware jam jar. There's two, and it comes with the with tray. I just bought the little blue lidded one. There was an orange one and this blue one, both with yellow bodies, and the tray was yellow. And if you look carefully, that's the old symbol for Toastmaster back in the day. So this would have been used with your Toastmaster for jam and jelly in the morning. And it's perfect for a salt cellar. As you can see, I keep the most often used ingredients right there on the counter so I can grab them, pour it into the pot, whatever, and it's good to go. I don't have to root through stuff all the time just to get what I need. As you can see, I keep the tall pasta in the back, and the yellow bowl was picked up a couple of years ago at the Goodwill. Now, when it comes to buying a house like this, that's missing some elements that you need in your kitchen, it's called using your mind, being creative, thinking outside the box to come up with things that you know it needs. And as I said earlier, I added this counter, or this island, because there was nothing here. When you can't take something like your cast iron pan and you can't put it anywhere, then what's the cook to do? So what I do instead is be able to reach into the drawer, grab either a pot holder or, in this case, whatever, put it down, and then move the pan to it. Simple as that. At the counter, doing whatever, and then to the stove. Island partly I chose it because it was in response to losing the storage space that would have been right where the dishwasher is now, which I'll get to in a minute. This left drawer is where I keep tasting spoons and forks for scrambling and what have you, and bar mops, the scale, nitrile gloves for handling raw meat, and pot holders and stuff behind. And it's perfect because I get into this drawer at least once a day. And self-closing. This drawer, everything else. Bins, most of these I had already. Some I got from my late mother. But as a result, I keep it corralled for all the small things. Things like certain things go back here, certain things go here, and I know right where to look for it. Over here I have the vacuum bin, the wine cork, a thermopan, etc. And the back I have a couple of knives, my cheap Sintaku knife, and I have a couple of bench scrapers and a bowl scraper. And this is also where I would keep the flour sacks to use as cheesecloth for straining, etc. And this drawer gets pulled in, gets reached into at least once a week. Again, self-closing drawer glides. Down here, it looks a bit of a mess, but it does have a semblance of order here. These are small casseroles and the mixing bowls that have two Revereware inside of the Winco bowl, which is actually I picked up at a restaurant supply house. Back behind it is bakingware, bread pans, a cake pan, etc. The vintage crock pot that was my mother's, that she gave me when she moved up to a 5-quart, that's a 3-quart. The mini fruit chopper that she gave me for Christmas 2006. Salad spinner. Back there is my wok and a vintage Osterizer 8-speed blender from about 1970 that I bought in an estate sale. Oh, the waffle iron's back there too. Below, it's all mostly single layer, but it's the vintage 5.5-quart oval Dutch oven from Le Creuset. It's a vintage one. Stock pot, 8-quart. A marinade container, plus a colander, and 2 scrap bowls, which I use for cooking. And of course, casseroles. Now, to get that casserole out, or the Dutch oven out, just reach down, grab it, and there it is on the stove, ready to go. To open up a cabinet and then go dig around for it and then dig for the lid, you just grab it, ready to go. My cast iron pan, which was my mom's, she gave it to me a bunch of years ago, normally hangs up here. I just hadn't done it since I used it last. So this would have been right where the dishwasher is. The difference is, that's where the dishwasher is. On the side here are hooks that came with the island. You can put them on both sides, or both ends, but because that end is up by the stove, I only have them down here. 2 Dutch ovens and colanders, hand colanders, or strainers. Opposite here is my sink. And as you notice, it's right next to the bathroom door. This was not uncommon in vintage kitchens like this. Back before the 20s, you didn't even have cabinets. You were lucky if you had a single wall cupboard and maybe the cold water sink provided in the kitchen, along with maybe a light and hookup for your stove. All cool storage was either done by California Coolers, which was a special cabinet that got the cool air from outside, or you had an icebox. Here is the upper cabinets. As you can see, there are no doors. They were here when I bought the house, and I'll show you a picture of them. I took them down, and last summer, you can see right here, there's some stain. These cabinets were dark brown at one point, and that was the style that sat between the doors when closed. I took them down because they were in my way and I was tired of fighting behind them. So over the summer, I took them out and they were just held in with nails, just toe nailed in. These cabinets were built on site, and they were built out of just raw wood. No pre-made cabinets existed back in the day. So what you see here was built to the kitchen, and they figure, well, there's a sink, which in this case is a newer sink, but originally likely had an enameled wall sink with a drain board. That was it, and these upper cabinets. Now, about this lower cabinet. It's janky. I don't have any love for it, but it gets the job done right now. And there used to be a cabinet, as you can see by the opening here. It's not as tall as that door, but it were two doors, and it was dry storage for pots and pans. I usurped the storage and added this dishwasher. The dishwasher and the refrigerator were both purchased at a architectural salvage place called Second Use shortly after they opened in early 2017. And I paid $75 for the dishwasher, and it's so far doing yeoman's duty. I run it at least once a week. Actually, I run it several nights a week. Not every night, but at least every other night. And because I knew the storage was going to come out, I needed to replace it. That's where the island came in. This little sliver of storage, by the way, I knew that was going to happen. So I made it into a place to put all my sheet pans and stuff. Perfect. Now, about this corner. Yes, there is a water heater there. It came with the house, and that's where it was put. Replaced in 2014, so it's not that old. I will, at some point, look into, when I can afford to do so, replacing it with tankless. The shower is on the other side of the wall, so it doesn't take too long to get hot water to the shower. But it's in the corner, and what I'm thinking at some point when money is there to rebuild this kitchen is rip all this out, put in shallower shelves about no deeper than the upper cabinets, with maybe some lower shelves a little, not quite as deep as the counter, but a little bit deeper, like 12 inches. 12 to 16 inches, with maybe some drawers, and then put the refrigerator right by put the refrigerator right there, and then extend the counter out this way, move the stove down a little bit if necessary, and then counter it that way for prep. Move the hot water heater in there, and then go with a stacked washer, either a stacked washer and dryer, or two units that can be moved sat side by side. This room will have to be probably rebuilt at some point when the time comes, but for now it's functional. Simply because it was originally a back porch that was enclosed back in the late 60s and was jury-rigged at some point when they put a new roof on for the deck. But they never leveled the floor, ever. It's still the original deck framing. This floor has seen better days. As you can see, there's a tear where the part of the floor tile has come up. And over here, some of the finishes stripped out. That was there when I moved in. Oh, I forgot to mention, this whole lower cabinet looks janky. It's because it was made out of plywood and a jigsaw and some nails. Back in the late 60s, we're guessing, because underneath the dishwasher there is an ad glued to the floor. Why? I don't know. That showed a full-page ad for the old Kmart that used to exist on 6th Avenue. And the date was, I think, sometime in the spring of 1968, which coincides with the fact that there was a permit to enclose that back porch was pulled that same year. I think around the same time. That's what I mean by dealing with an old house that's had history that predates you. Because you never know what the previous owners have done or didn't do to the home. Sometimes you find a home that's been jury-rigged to the point to where you're scratching your head and wondering, how is this house able to be sold? And you walk away from it because it has too many issues. Other homes, like this one, despite being what it is, and despite being as old as it is, structurally sound, was just updated just enough to make it relevant when it was still a rental, which it likely was back in the day. But that was it, and mechanical structural shape. This door is what came with the house. Unfortunately, they had already put in a cheap, ugly cat door. And I took it out and tried to widen it a little bit for a larger dog. Didn't work, it sits too high. And the whole door is kind of warped and racked out anyway. So I'm thinking about pulling the glass, because it's actual wavy glass, and then selling that, and then tossing the door. But I might talk to Second Use and see what they might be able to give me for the door as is. And someone can replace the panel down there. Anyhow, that's something to think about, because I want to pull it out and pull off the hinges so it's not in my way. I don't close it anymore. Don't see the need to with the hole in the door. Now, this side of the room is upper cabinet and lower cabinet that was clearly built when the kitchen was put in back in the 20s. The 4 drawers I've had to repair and replace the rail guides. This is the silverware drawer, and it was logical because it had dividers already in it. And if you look carefully, you can tell it had not been painted inside in quite a few years. And if you look carefully, you can see where the paint's worn. On this side, even more so. A couple of summers ago, I replaced these center rails. This top one in particular was splitting, and it was bowing from all the years of being worn against the bottom of that drawer. So what I did was I mounted this nylon guide. Works pretty well. And also, right here, and one on the other side, is what the drawer rides on. In fact, in here you can kind of see, very carefully, there's a bit of wear on this style, on this rail. As you can see, there's a section, I think, of the side rail that's split out, and it's just barely holding on to the lower drawer, the lower panel of the drawer. If you look way down there, you can see it's not that far off either. This drawer has seen better days. But we are talking about a 90-plus-year-old set of cabinets that have probably not had the best of care over the years. And being that this house was likely a rental until sometime in probably the 70s when it was bought by, I guess, previous owners, and they owned it for quite a long time. Anyhow, that is my top drawer. you can see right there, I've had to nail this drawer back into place because it was starting to pull out from here. Unfortunately, they did not do any dovetail joinery on these. So they're just all toe nailed in, face frames, and everything. Not an uncommon thing in houses like these. As I showed, this is my silverware drawer, and it's also where I keep the steak knives and butter spreaders, which came from a set of stuff that I bought at a church garage sale a bunch of years ago when I had a matching set of the regular flatware. And it was a set of 8 plus all the serving pieces. I found that it didn't work real well with my space, and it was catching on here and not stacking real easily, and I was bending the tines. So I got rid of it and got this poem set, unfortunately discontinued at IKEA. But I was thought ahead enough to buy 2 sets of 4, so there's 8. I do keep the this guy, I forget what, it's the butter sifter unit that you put butter in on your flour, and then you use this to break the flour or the butter up into the flour. I put it here for the simple reason that it's just a good spot for it. This drawer is where I keep the mandolins, the grater discs, slicing discs for the food processor. And if you're wondering why there's a couple of extras, it's because I had to buy a new food processor last year, and it came with the discs, and I already had a good set. This is a plastic flatware drawer, as for everything else. The fondue forks, salad forks, all that stuff goes in here. I may be cleaning this out just because there's a few things I'm finding I really don't use. So why hang on to them? But this is this drawer. As you can see, it's the same green. This drawer is everything else. All of the smaller baking folderol, the measuring cups, the funnel, the flour sifter, all of that gets stored in here. And as a creative individual, I found that a couple of plastic containers, one's a Rubbermaid and one's a, I think a Ziploc disposable, were perfect for all the small things that you can keep corralled into one spot. So if I know I need the mixing, so if I know I need the mixers, the beaters for either of the mixers, I can look in there. If I need the lemon reamer, it's right there. Over here, it's a little bit of everything else, including a few measuring cups, dry measuring cups, etc. are in there. So I'm not hunting around inside of a messy drawer. These are messy in a sense, but it's easier to find stuff in a small space than it is in a bigger drawer. Especially a deep drawer where everything falls to the bottom. Down here is where I keep all the plastic bags, the foil, the plastic wrap, and all that stuff. And another plastic container is perfect for the other odd stuff that gets put in there, like the silicone mats, the scraper for my pizza stone, which I need to replace because mine's cracked in multiple places, etc. and so forth. When I first moved in the house, this drawer was difficult to get into because of this drawer. This one, the center rail, which is holding it up, had fallen down at the wall. So it was hanging down, so it was kind of like this, you know, at an angle, and it was making it difficult. I had to open this drawer to get to this drawer. I finally did replace them all, and they all work a lot better now with the new rail in place. And because these are things I don't get into on a regular basis, like day to day, or even week to week, they're fine over here. Now, flatware, I get into daily because I need a fork or spoon or something for lunch or whatever meal I'm eating. But it's also close to the table, so that makes a lot of sense. But the others, I don't need to get into on day-to-day basis for anything. So they're easy to get to, but yet they're just out of the way. This little cabinet was used as to store hand towels and dish towels. The reason for that is because I used to have a chest right over there that I moved when I brought the table in last year. So I needed something to put them in. So a trip to Target produced that. It gets the job done, but I'll find something. Down here is a shelf. I don't think there was ever any drawers or doors on it. There was no evidence that there had been. I use it for Tupperware storage and for the vintage mixer, a bin for the stick mixer, the vintage hand mixer, and bun pans and a few other things. This upper cabinet is actually too shallow to really use as a prep counter. It's more like a butler's type of pantry. The outlet was added later, as were the other outlets on this wall. Actually, there's one there, and there's one right over there. And those were added later, and they're grounded. At some point, I wouldn't be too surprised if the counter was basically a dark stain like the cabinets. This was the perfect place to put the microwave. This used to be where I kept my dishes when I first moved in the house. I had it set up that way. But after, I think, 6 months, I realized that was a mistake. This cabinet's larger, be better for food storage, which had been my food storage. But because I was putting things away, I had to bring them over here. As a result, and then last summer I pulled the stiles out. Because of this cabinet being for dishes initially, I took the doors off right away. That first week I took possession of the house. And then the stiles came out last summer. Eventually, when I moved the dishes over here, these came out. Up here, there's these two upper shelves that had a door, and I took that door out I think a couple of years ago, because it was just this lone door, and I decided why not just take it out and toss it. Below here was for glassware, which to me makes sense, so I used it for that. When I first moved in this house, that light did not exist. We turned it off. Not very pleasant, is it? That was a game changer. Just putting a light in so I can wash my dishes by hand and not be in the dark was a game changer. Because I don't like being in a dark corner. I really don't. So that made it a lot easier, and there's really no way to put a window in. So I bought this lamp and put it in. The faucet was very much the kitchen version of that. I kid you not, probably was like a $40 to $50 um, faucet when it was new. I found this at second use for 25 bucks, and I think it was probably no more than a couple of years old. Perfect. The only thing I don't like about it is you have to twist this knob, this part, in order to go from stream to spray. This is my eating area. I bought the table last year in January. Picked it up off of OfferUp for 150 bucks. Normally I wouldn't pay that much, but it was helping an elderly couple who were trying, I guess, sell furniture and stuff, and the gentleman who was selling it was helping them do it. So the money went back to them. I love it. It seats up to 6, 8 in a major pinch. But it can be done. But for now, it's my kitchen table, and it's probably from the late 50s, early 60s. The placemat, I bought those about 30 years ago at an estate sale, and they're made by Vera. The lamp is an IKEA cord set with a paper shade. Perfect. I just keep it on a dimmer. And this shelf, my dad made this for my mother in 1968 when we lived in Oklahoma. And she wanted a place to put her cookbooks and stuff. And so it's been in several houses, and then in 2002, I think it was, she gave it to me, and I've had it ever since. It hangs from chains and a couple of hooks. The blue apothecary jars, she got as a Christmas present from a late uncle of mine on my father's side. Her brother-in-law, and he was working part-time at a hardware store in, I think, Cleveland, Georgia, and he got those for her for Christmas. They were pretty popular back then. They came in that blue, and I think they came in a green, and I'm not sure what other colors. Might be sort of ruby red and amber, but who knows. Anyway, they're my mom's, and now I have them. The yellow tray I picked up in an estate sale almost 30 years ago. This is the kitchen, and yes, I'm still rocking fluorescent fixtures. This is not LED, and it's not going to become LED, because I'm going to replace this modern T8 generic fixture with a vintage one, if I can find one that's not been updated as far as electronics and stuff, with vintage, ideally vintage ballasts and preheat starters on T12 lamps. Because I think this kitchen, looking at its style, really, really needs to rock what I call the farmhouse look. In other words, an old farmhouse that was probably built around 1900 that's been updated as updated needed to be done, but never actually remodeled in any way, shape, or form. So variously, you get different periods in a kitchen. And this idea actually came from a house my middle sister and her first husband rented in the late 70s, early 80s. It was a 2-bedroom house built about 1910 in Seattle. It had a view. The kitchen was long and narrow from front to back. And you had to go into the kitchen to the bathroom, which was in the kitchen, and turn around 180 degrees and then go into the middle bedroom, and then through that bedroom into the front bedroom, then out into the dining room, and then the living room was at the front of the house. The kitchen was along the side. And being that it was from 1910 and probably had cabinets either put in at the time the house was built or a few years later, down one side was a cooling cabinet, a stove like mine across the other side of the kitchen, but in the ceiling, 3 or 4 tube, vintage half pipe, Art Deco style, fluorescent fixture that was probably installed in the late 40s or early 50s. And I remember being really fascinated by it and turning it on and hearing the blink, blink, blink as the bulbs each individually lit. That's what I want for this. I bought this clock last summer of 2019 in Ocean Shores at the Ace Hardware there. They had just moved to a new building and these were still stacked on a table in the back corner in housewares. $15. And I figured it would be a nicer one than what I had. And it's a little bit more contemporary in style, so I repurposed it and put it in the studio. The refrigerator and the dishwasher were both purchased in March of 2017. I went to an open house at Second Use, and they were there, and thought about it, and contacted a buddy of mine, and we made arrangements to pick them up the next day if I can get them. And I was able to call, not realizing they were closed, and someone fortunately answered the phone, and I was able to put them on hold, and we went down the next day and picked them up. Both have been good purchases. The refrigerator is just a few months older than the stove, so they're the same vintage, and they are both from GE, and they're both, I think, from the same family of appliances, so they match. And the dishwasher just happens to be a black KitchenAid, so they all visually match together. Okay. See that? That is the opening between my refrigerator and my stove. And you can see a bit of the hot water heater. The reason for that, as a no-no, is being able to open the oven door and see, I can't even open the refrigerator all the way, so I can't even get into it. So the idea is to have space so you can open up that oven door and be able to get into the refrigerator if you need to for anything. And I'm going to try an experiment and move the refrigerator down and move the garbage cans over here. That might work, but I'm thinking maybe having a little bit more room for the bathroom door, because it opens into the kitchen instead of into the bathroom. Now when I rebuild the space, that's going to be a pocket door. Anyway, yeah, that is not normal, but when you're dealing with an old kitchen like this, you sometimes have to make do with what you've got. Over here is my recycling and garbage center. Like I said, I may be swapping these two places around. This old garbage can started out in my bedroom when I was still living at home. And then it became a kitchen garbage can when I moved into my last apartment for 13 years. This little lighter green or sage green, dusty green bin is for glass recycling. And this garbage can is for everything else. I don't put food scraps, because I do have food scrap bowls. Those two, the red bowl and the yellow bowl, for tossing food scraps in, and then they go outside. If you can see right there is a white lid just behind my grill. That's the 3-gallon recycling, and when that gets full, I take it out to the recycling to the recycle bin itself, and that gets emptied once a week. In fact, this coming week will be recycling. So it works quite well, and at the end of the night, I'm not with food in the kitchen, because I had a mouse infestation. I had a mouse in here once before, recently. In fact, there's one of the traps, one back there, and one down here, and I think the mouse itself is gone. I just haven't moved them, gotten rid of them, and I have two more. Actually, they're sitting on the dryer. Because most chefs, when they cook to speed, which means their kitchen, their prep work is all done for them. So all they have to do is simply grab a handful, make a dice or two if they need it, assemble the dish, and cook it. And they can have an elaborate meal on the table in 15 minutes. In a professional setting, they'll have either plates up here so they can just grab one and then plate, or they'll have multiple skillets, something similar to this guy right here, or whatever. And they'll grab one, cook the meal, and then set it aside to be picked up by the person who runs the dishwasher. And then they'll grab a clean one. And then when the stuff gets washed, get brought back and put on. It's my kitchen. This is where I cook. And it's called a working kitchen for a reason, because it works. I cook in it, and it gets dirty, and not made to be a show place. Not made to impress anybody. So this is the kitchen as it is